As the fourth son of King George V, Prince George, Duke of Kent, never had to worry about becoming king, and so while he might have been born into a life of privilege, it wasn't really one of great responsibility. Prince George was born on December 1902. The fourth son of King Edward VII and Queen Mary, he was said to be particularly fond of American culture, often spending summers in the United States and bringing back American slang to use amongst friends. On December 29, 1934, Prince George married Princess Marina of Greece in Denmark at Westminster Abbey. Although the two weren't lovers, there was definitely chemistry between them, which made some of George's contemporaries uncomfortable. But this wasn't the only relationship that caused gossip to swirl around the royal couple. George was also known for his close relationship with actress and singer Gracie Fields, whom he first met when she was performing in a production of A Christmas Carol in 1934. He joined the Royal Air Force and worked as an intelligence officer. He rose quickly through the ranks and was given command of an operational training unit. It was here that he honed his flying skills. There was no way to know for sure what had happened. The pilot had failed to make a mayday call, and there was no evidence that the plane had been sabotaged. He was a young man with his whole life ahead of him. Please let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical tales. He had a wife and 3 children who loved him dearly. He was also a dedicated soldier who was serving his country in a time of war. His death was a shock to the royal family and the nation as a whole, but over time, his memory has faded and he has become nothing more than a footnote in history. The only theory that the board could come up with was that the pilot had lost control of the plane deliberately. However, this was just a guess, and there was no way to prove it. The crash was never officially explained and George's body was never recovered. Flying was one of the few things that George was truly passionate about, and he took to it like a fish in water. His colleagues respected him and enjoyed his company, and he was generally happy with his lot. Fields was known for her rendition of the song Sally and was also quite popular in America. Having performed for U.S. troops in World War II, he was accompanied by 2 pilots, squadron leader Peter Wykeham and pilot officer Tom Rose. The trio boarded a B-24 Liberator bomber for the short trip. However, before long, it was clear that something was wrong. The plane was out of balance and not climbing as it should. George was in the middle of giving instructions when the plane suddenly dropped. It nosedived into the ground and exploded. The only survivor was pilot officer Rose, who suffered severe injuries and was unable to speak. When questioned, he told investigators that he couldn't remember much about the crash. He had been sitting in the back of the plane with George, when suddenly the pilot had turned to them and said, "I'm sorry, boys, I've got to bail out." And that was the last thing he remembered. But it was her connection to the infamous royal that brought her the most attention. In fact, she was so close to George that when he died, she canceled an entire tour of Australia to come home and be with his widow and children. Some believe that George's death was no accident, but rather that he was the victim of foul play. Others believe that the crash was covered up, because it would have been too embarrassing for the royal family if the truth had come out. There's even a theory that the pilot had been drinking, and that the plane crashed because of his poor judgment. However, this is just speculation, and there is no evidence to support any of these claims. According to her biographer, Patricia Eden, Fields and the Duke had an emotional bond that was platonic, but it certainly didn't help to quell the rumors already plaguing the Duke's name. Like many other members of the Greek royal family, Marina had been forced into exile following the abolition of the monarchy in Greece. Apparently, he used this flat as a place where he could entertain his guests without his wife knowing. They had 3 children and a beautiful home in Kensington Palace. So why then did George seek to fill his extramarital needs elsewhere? One possible explanation is that George and Marina weren't getting along. After all, their personalities were chalk and cheese. George was known as the black sheep of the royal family, while Marina was seen as shy and reserved. There are even rumors that Marina was aware of her husband's infidelities, but kept quiet out of fear of scandal. Perhaps she was hoping that it would blow over. Whatever the case may be, it seems that their relationship wasn't a happy one. One can only imagine what secrets these walls could tell if they could talk. So what exactly was going on at 17 Belgrave Square? We may never know for sure, but that hasn't stopped historians and biographers from speculating for decades. At the time of her marriage to George, she was 17 years old and considered one of the most eligible princesses in Europe. Following the wedding, Marina converted to Protestantism and became a naturalized British subject. Her father, Prince Nicholas of Greece and Denmark, attended the wedding with his wife, Princess Helena Victoria of the United Kingdom, who was the first cousin of Queen Mary. The couple went on to have 3 children together: Prince William, Lord Windsor, Prince Richard, Earl of Athlone, and Princess Alexandra. Unfortunately for Marina, her husband was still very much the notorious playboy, and she quickly learned that she would have to share him with his other loves. He was also a particular fan of jazz music and spent a lot of his time frequenting jazz clubs in London. Some of the famous clubs that he frequented included the Hole in the Wall, which was favored by both royalty and criminals alike, and the French Room, which was apparently so popular that people had to queue to gain entry. In fact, George was such a devotee of jazz that he assembled his own band, which he called the Scandalous, after the street on which his mother's house was located. Rumors abounded that George's mother was none too pleased about her son's fascination with jazz, but she did little to stop it. Instead, she indulged his other vices by buying him a $300,000 Rolls-Royce Phantom II Continental. Unfortunately, George would soon lose his license for speeding and crash the very same car, which was insured for only $200,000. This accident enraged his mother, who refused to pay for the damages unless George married. It is said that she hired private investigators to track his every move in order to find a suitable bride. At the time, there was little to no chance that he would ever become king. But that didn't mean that he was destined for any less of a life of privilege. Growing up, George and his older brother, Prince John, were looked after primarily by their mother, while their father was known to favor their elder siblings, Edward, Albert, and Henry. In 1906, Prince George and his brother Prince John moved to a house in Paris where they lived for 6 years. While living in France, Prince George attended a school run by a Jesuit order until 1930, when he returned to London to continue his education at Harrow School. 2 years later, upon the outbreak of World War I, George returned to live with his parents in Windsor Castle. With his father now acting as the figurehead of the war effort, the young prince's education was put on hold as he assisted his mother with royal duties. For instance, he was present at the funeral of King Edward, his grandfather, in May 1910. But even though George was participating in royal activities, this was only a stopgap in his real education until the conflict ended. Between 1914 and 1918, he was appointed to the position of a midshipman in the Royal Navy, stationed aboard HMS Collingwood. Upon the conclusion of the war, George was able to return to civilian life and take up his place as a student at Royal Military College, Sandhurst, where he trained for a career in the Army. George graduated in 1922 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Honorable Artillery Company. He served as a guards officer for King George V during the King's state visit to France in 1927. Being promoted to the rank of captain, he resigned his commission 4 years later, leaving the Army to focus on other pursuits. Born in 1902, George found himself free to pursue many of his desires, which is how he became one of the most notorious royals of the 20th century. But what did George get up to? Why was he one of the most scandalous royals of all time? And how did he die? In this episode of Royals Explained, we'll be answering these questions and many more about the late Prince George, Duke of Kent. Let's start at the beginning. As a young man, George was very much a product of his time and was well known for his love of fast cars and fast women. So who did Prince George end up marrying? Enter Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. One of George's most famous relationships was with the artist Tamaragiva, whose portrait he sat for several times. Another source of gossip was the Duke's flat at 17, Belgrave Square. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Prince George and his wife, Princess Marina, seemed to be doing well. When war broke out, George felt compelled to do his duty and serve in the armed forces. On August 25, 1942, George left the Scottish seaside town of Silloth-Fordrum, Fife, in Scotland, where he was based. A board of inquiry was set up to investigate the crash, but its findings were the crash was a devastating blow to the royal family, but it also gave rise to decades of conspiracy theories. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is for sure. The death of Prince George was a tragedy. What did you think of the controversial Prince George? Which other royals would you like us to cover next?